Our next speaker is Aishwaryan Srivasanan, and she's a data scientist with Google Cloud AI Services. She's also the founder for Illuminate AI, which I don't know if you've heard of this, but I looked it up. It's pretty interesting. It's basically a mentorship program for artificial intelligence interested professionals. She's also a LinkedIn top voice, and she has a Master of Science in Data Science from Columbia University. People refer to her as a data science unicorn. Please welcome Aishwarya.
So, hello everyone. My name is Aishwarya Srinivasan. I'm part of the Google Cloud AI Services team. I am a hands-on data science practitioner, and outside of work, I had been very interested in responsible AI, and I had done some initiatives in nonprofit organizations which got me more interested in responsible AI, and I started picking up some work in Google which was in the same stream. And I thought I can talk about that and basically mention how we can go from principles to practice, right? Like, how do organizations put this into production? A lot of times when I started learning about responsible AI, I could see information about what do you mean by responsible AI? What are the principles? What should be done? And what are the good ways to maintain responsible AI? What are the aspects of it? But nobody really talked about how does an organization put this into production? How do you implement it? Who are the personas who are going to be using it? How do you build programs around it? What are the tools that you're going to use for it? And that's what I'm going to be covering in today's talk. And people who are executives or leaderships and who are in the position to push for implementing responsible AI, I think this would be a great place for you to start and understand how can your organization grow in the space of responsible AI. So let's start talking about where does this responsible AI theme come into picture, right? Like, why do we need it? Why does it really matter for us to have responsible AI integrated in our organizations whenever we are thinking about building data science and AI applications? So 10 years ago, a decade ago, we started having research in data science and AI. There were a lot of organizations which was doing innovation, development, and since the last 10 years, we have seen that the growth has gone from research into productionalization. We have seen more and more applications that have AI integrated in it, right from smartwatches, from your Google Home Assistant, from your smartphones, etc. All of these applications have some form of AI application integrated into it. And all of us are using it day in, day out. Some of us understand how the technology works, but most of us don't. And that's where it becomes very important about understanding what's the power of the technology that we have in our hand, and it becomes the responsibility and the accountability for the organizations who are building these technologies. So in one of the recent studies, it was shown by PwC and McKinsey that the global GDP in the next decade, so we spoke about what's happening in the past decade, right? Now in the next decade, the global GDP is going to increase by 14% just because of AI applications that are being put into production. And to put this into context, this is much higher than what we saw with the advent of internet. So we are seeing that AI is going to be much more impactful for the businesses, for the global economy, much higher compared to what internet was doing for us in the past decades. And AI is going to be contributing as the #1 factor for the increase in our GDPs. So we do understand what's the impact of this in our organizations. We do see the impact of this in our economy. And that is where we need to understand why responsible AI is what is going to help us build successful AI solutions. Because when we are looking at AI solutions, it's not magic. It's not a magic box. It's not something that's going to always give you the right solutions. In the recent session that Vijay delivered, he spoke about all the problems that would that could integrate into when you are building in AI solutions, right? And that is what I'm talking about, because when you're building AI solutions in silos, in research and development, it is more in a contained environment. It has a lot of restricted constraints, and that sort of is not the same when you are putting that into production. It completely changes when you are actually putting these applications into production. Now, you don't just have internet, you have cloud, you have data, you have all kinds of integrated pieces that are going to make your application successful. And that's why it becomes more important for us to understand how these moving pieces integrate with each other and what kind of principles and programs and tools do we need in place to make sure that our AI applications are successful. So, when we are thinking about these applications, right, like these applications are built by humans. We talk about these automation systems, we talk about prediction systems, we talk about prescriptive systems. But all of these systems are built by humans. And inherently, we see that a lot of the data that have been derived from the past has biases, has issues, has data quality and vulnerabilities that can now get infused into the AI applications that we're building. And that is where it becomes more challenging for us to filter out on what really contributes to a good AI application versus how do you detect any kind of bias or vulnerability that gets into these AI systems. So this is one of the examples that I had seen sometime in the past, that you would have oftentimes used bandage without realizing that it's always in a very light shade, in a very light pink color. And the difference between equality and equity as we speak is that everybody who's using a particular product or an application needs to feel that the product is built for them. And this was one of the tweets that came up, and this person had put that this is the first time that he's using a Band-Aid that is actually of his color and that blends into his skin. So this is what I was meaning by having those kind of biases, having inherent way or like stereotypes which gets into the AI systems that we're building. Another example that I can share, I see some of you are Indians in the audience, so maybe something that you can relate with. So oftentimes when I'm using maps, I am searching for a particular store. Let's say I'm saying navigate to bazaar. And the application is not able to understand what I say because of my accent, because of the word which is not really coming from an English dictionary. That is bias. That is a system that is not able to integrate all the needs of all the users, right? That's where we need personas, that's where we need more diversity on the table, that's where we need program managers and product managers who are able to understand who the users are going to be and how is this product going to impact users at scale. That being said, from more of a technical standpoint, you would have seen, this came out in the Gartner, not the Gartner one? Okay, it was another global survey that basically said that 87% people or the respondents for the survey said that their data was giving in the biases into the model. So the biases that was existing in the data was now getting into the models, and that's what they could see in the model decisions. And 65% respondents said that they are really not able to explain what the model decisions are. That's where the explainability part come in. These are two core concepts of responsible AI, which are coming from more data and model perspective. And on top of this, we will have governance, we will have privacy. There are a lot more components to responsible AI that we need to take care of. So if you were to see the Gartner trend, it said that scalable, responsible, and smarter AI was their major market trend in 2021, which is pretty explainable because that's what a lot of companies have been pushing forward to, especially with respect to all kinds of regulations with GDPR, CCPA, and organizations holding international data, holding data from multiple nationalities across the globe. Now they have to comply to all these regulations and they have to make sure that they are able to adhere to all these different kinds of policies and governance practices. So I like to picture this in a way that the first 3 points that you see when organizations are actually building AI applications in a more responsible way. The first 3 points, which are improving customer engagement, increasing revenue growth, and strengthening your product value, is a derived value. These are more derived from what you're producing, versus preparing yourself for the upcoming AI regulation is something which is more immediate. Because when we are designing these systems, as you know that they're pretty expensive. Every time you're putting models into experimentation, every time you're building these pipelines, every time you're retraining the models, etc., you are consuming a lot of compute resources. You're consuming a lot of data storage, and it costs money. And it becomes really important that companies are ready to understand what these regulations and governance policies are going to have an impact on them, and be ready to produce these applications which are able to adhere to these kind of policies. Now, it's a known fact that technology and humanity come together, and that's when we can produce better AI solutions, and that's what is the core backbone of building responsible AI systems. So in a very quick manner, I wanted to just go over what Google Cloud is doing, what my team is doing when we are adhering to responsible AI principles. So this is both for internal products as well as the customer engagements that we're working on, that we are reviewing all the inputs that are the reason for us to build those solutions, the reason for us to build those products. What are the scenarios that we're looking at? What are the user bases? How frequently are we going to use this model? What is the granularity that we're going to use the model for, etc. And that's what fuels us to develop these products and platforms that are able to help us put this into practice. And the other part that we are doing is we are also enabling the partners. So you might know that Google works a lot with their partners, and we are supporting, advising, training the partners to also build responsible AI solutions in their own way. Now, when we are defining these principles, I'll be covering that in the next couple of slides. When we are designing these principles, it has to match with your company policies, it has to match with your organizational goals and OKRs, and that's where we are helping and training them to onboard on how to have a responsible AI ecosystem in their organization. And of course, we are producing a lot of content in terms of white papers and blogs and video podcasts, etc., which is helping grow the industry as a whole. And some of you might also have seen the trusted AI principles that had come out, which was basically the top cloud providers, including Google, had come together and they had formulated trusted AI principles. So if you haven't checked that out, I would definitely say you should give that a read. And that's what's going to get extended into responsible AI on cloud as well. So I'm going to go fast here because I see we are running a little late on time. So the parts that I was mentioning earlier was us dividing responsible AI, the framework, into 3 sections. So we have the principles and programs that is basically defining how the framework would look like. What are we trying to achieve out of that framework? The second one is programs, about how do we break this down into actionable items. Who does what, right? So we are breaking this down to what are the streams, who are the personas who will be taking care, and what are the end goals or metrics that we're trying to measure. Those are the programs. Third part is the tools that we're using. When we say explainable AI, how do we measure explainable AI? How do we look at the feature importances? How do we measure if a model is fair or not? And most importantly, how do we do that in a feedback loop, right? Like, how do we make sure that our platform and products are able to do that in a continuous manner? So this is just a brief glimpse of how Google started with their AI principles. So this was started as a project in 2017, and this was more from a AI, just purely AI perspective. And it started moving to cloud because that's the moving parts that I was talking about, right? Like, now we have data privacy, we have regulations about what data can be used, how it should be used. We have cloud, we have breaches, we have internet vulnerabilities, and on top of it, we have everything around AI. So Google started including the responsible AI as a major strategy for them when they were getting into cloud. And then they recently published, like in 2018, they published the AI principles, and they have been iterating on it. And there have been a lot of use cases that have been published from different industries that can be a starting point for some of you. You might be interested in that. So you can give a read to all the use cases that is available online. And it's very simple. It's been broken down into what should be the to-dos and not to-dos. So AI principle is basically the things that we are looking forward to on how we build these products, and the things that we commit not to do, right? If I can give you a very simple example. Imagine a HR recruitment system where you are being selected for being shortlisted for a job role, and imagine that we are making a prediction of what is your churn probability, right? Like how long are you probably going to stay in that role if you were hired for that role? And if we start predicting this in the granularity of a person, then that starts getting unethical. So these are some of the things which need more subject matter expertise and know-hows on what should be done versus what should not be done. So these are the driving principles of Google Responsible AI. And as our CEO says, that the principles, if they are meaningless if they are on paper, of course. And that's what I wanted to say, that when I started my journey learning about responsible AI, it was all principles. It was all theory on paper, and there was no good resource about how do we productionalize it. How do I make a model? How do I build a model? How do I manage data sources which are adhering to these principles? And that's what I wanted to go on to next. So I have covered this about like how we are doing this both for internal products as well as any of the engagements that we're doing. So I wanted to get here. So I wanted to make sure that you notice the ML system part. So this is where we are building the ML system. This is the core model part that we are working on, right? So what are the possible issues that can get into this particular pipeline? When we are collecting data, we can have biases when we are collecting data. When we are processing the data, there can be data labeling issues, there can be sampling biases, etc. When we are training the model, that's when we can have the biases coming from data getting into the model and us not being able to detect those kind of biases. And evaluation, again, we don't have a baseline to understand if a model is unbiased or not. And that is where we can totally miss out if a model is being biased. And one of the things that we saw earlier as well is having these feedback loops, right? Like how do you make sure that your model is relevant, is good, even in a longer run? Right now, I build a model, it works perfectly fine. I try it on a test data set as well, it works perfectly fine. But how do I know that on a longer run, 5 months down the line, 6 months down the line, it is going to still work fine? And that's where feedback loop or continuous evaluation, that which I was also talking about, becomes very, very important. Now, coming back, the difference between the previous slide that I was showing you and this one is, that was more about the ML system itself that we are designing versus this is the ML lifecycle. This is right from where we decide why we need to build that solution, right? The first point that we talk about is defining the problem. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? What is the kind of solution that is going to help us achieve our goals? And these are the questions that we want to ask ourselves whenever we are picking out each and every problem that we are trying to solve. Right from defining what is the problem that we want to solve to collecting and preparing the data. One of the things that you might have heard of, especially in vision use case, is that we train the model in a very, very skewed data set, which is unable to recognize or unable to process pictures of people from a certain ethnicity or background because the model was not trained on that data. That's the part where I'm talking about collecting and sampling the data, where we need to make sure that it is actually representative of the entire population that we are trying to build the model for. Then while we are training the model, we need to understand that how are we going to train the model? Who is going to be training the model? What is the granularity that the model prediction is going to make? What is the metric that we are trying to measure the model on? Is it purely technical, or is it more coming from a socioeconomic factor as well? And when we are evaluating the model, that's the metric that I was talking about, that how do we evaluate the model and make sure that the model is right, working right, and is unbiased, and how do we measure the level of bias or unfairness in the model? And the final part is when we are trying to deploy and monitor the model, we need to understand if the model is behaving the right way that we wanted it to in a long run. And of course, when we are understanding that the model is not working in the right way that we intended it to be, how do we solve that problem in a continuous integration manner? Now, these are some of the product that is coming from Google AI Suite. A lot of them are open source, some of them are enterprise versions, so I just wanted to lay it out in terms of which section does it contribute to, right from defining the problem to productionalizing the models. And the core part that I wanted to talk about today, right? Like, how do organizations who are building consumer-facing products, who are actually catering to B2C, who are building products for each of us, going to integrate this in their workflow? So, and this is again coming back to the point that Google has been helping a lot of their partners and training them to understand how to build this in practice. So we go from starting from like articulating what your values and principles are. This is subjective to each and every organization, subjective to the industry that we're building it for, and subjective to if it's a B2C or a B2B organization. And the next part is, how do we plan to operationalize these commitments? This involves hiring the right kind of people, hiring the right kind of persona, understanding who does what. And the next part we do is having an assessment framework. So this is basically having a methodology to assess and reflect and evaluate and give a feedback on whenever you're trying to assess if a particular use case or a particular solution is responsible or not. Then we define the metric for fairness. That's what I was talking about, right? Like, how do we measure? What's the metric? What's the number that is going to tell me if a model is fair or not? That is, again, subjective to the use case that we're building it for. So that needs to be defined, and that needs to be a standard that we are evaluating our model against. Then the review and discussion process is basically having a board that is able to help us like practice this standard process that we are laying out. Following that is crafting your alignment plan. So how do you craft your plan about like how your organization is functioning in terms of data governance, in terms of privacy policies, etc., to the responsible AI principles that we are building. And final part is, how do we do it continuously? How do we do it every time, each and every time we are planning to build a new model or we are planning to solve a new problem? So that being said, this is just an example slide where I have covered 3 specific areas. I'll just like talk about the first one, that's model transparency. So if you are looking to understand how transparent or how accountable your model is, what are the needs that we're trying to solve here? We need documentation, right? Like, we need to have documented artifacts about what was the data used, what was the model using as features, what are the models trained on, what are the parameters that are going into the model, and what are the output that we're getting out of the models. And all these are getting covered in the ML metadata. And the next 2 parts, which is basically general explainability along with explaining specific outputs, that's the decision explainability, are both covered under explainable AI. So these are the products which are in the Vertex AI Suite, which is a data and AI platform under Google Cloud Platform. So these are just some of the tools that are able to help us achieve these goals. That being said, I'm open to questions. I guess we are on time. So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and if you want, you can reach out to me on my email as well. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so that works the best. And I'll be available here if you have more questions, if you want to discuss anything specific about what I spoke in the slides. And if we have time, maybe we can take questions.
There we go. It's going to be loud.
Thank you for the talk. I enjoy it very much. I have a very specific application. It's about conversational AI. Say, this AI is to serve to give people suggestion, give them inspiration, or even recommend article, right, to this particular person. According to the purpose this user define. Say he want to say go to graduate school, right? Apply for Georgia Tech, and he has a conversation with this AI. The AI give him A, B, C, X, Y, Z, things like that. So in this kind of like relational conversation situation, how do you come up with some practical metric to evaluate this conversation is ethical, fair, things like that? Can you like share yourself? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just reiterate on the question that you just asked. So you're basically saying that we have a conversational AI system that is able to have a conversation, a regular conversation with a human. Is it safe to assume that this is more like a mentor conversation that somebody will be having with their mentor? Okay, awesome. So let's consider that this is an example when you are having a conversation with your mentor and you are asking for certain kinds of suggestions. Some of the metric which are really important and which needs to be predefined, it's not something that can be calculated or evaluated on the fly, is about any kind of stereotypes, right? Like, are we using any kind of sentences or phrases that are referring to any kind of stereotypes? Are we using any kind of words that could possibly be unethical in terms of like can it be negative towards a certain demographic of people, and those words can be categorized as harmful words, right? So there can be words and phrases that can be categorized under these section, and we can also be having a response kind of a metric, which is basically saying that if this particular sentence was communicated to somebody, what kind of emotion does it convey? Is it a positive, negative, or neutral emotion that it conveys? And what's the kind of response, and what's the emotion of the response that is conveyed back to that particular statement, right? So these could be some of the initial metric that I can think of on the fly. And similarly, there can be more defined metrics that can be subject to the use case. So, for example, there was a similar use case that you're mentioning about, where it was basically about a psychologist, right? Like having a chatbot psychologist who's able to help you with your general life and career problems. So, when you're specifically talking about those kind of use cases, these metrics would change. So, in that kind of a situation, you want to have a chatbot which is not influential, right? Like where it's not influencing your decisions, or it's not being suggestive of taking certain decisions in your life. Those can be certain metric that you can define. So depending on what use case are you using it in, what context are you using it in, you'll have to custom decide on these metric and develop these metric and then use them for evaluation.
Awesome, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Do we have any more questions?
I think we are right on time.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. I'll be happy to respond to your questions. Thank you.
Excellent.